Hello, and welcome to the second library podcast on legislation research. In this second library podcast, we will look at finding legislation and parliamentary materials, specifically finding second reading speeches within Hansard and explanatory memorandum of bills. It is important that you view the first podcast and the video on how laws are made prior to watching this podcast, so that you have some context. So how do you find legislation? Online versions of legislation are freely accessible via the official government websites. These are where you find the most up-to-date versions of legislation. To locate a piece of legislation when you have the title, you'll simply go to the government website in the relevant jurisdiction and then search by that title. If you'd like to go back to podcast number 1, you will see an example of how we do this. You can also search for legislation by topic. There are a number of databases or subject indexes that can help you at the library. I'm going to do a demonstration for you, finding Commonwealth Games in two of our library databases, Law 1, which is created by Timebase, and LawLex. So if you go to the library homepage, you can go to Subject Guides, select the Law Subject Guides, and then go to Legal Skills Research. When you look at how do I find legislation, you're given a number of links, and these are created here. Government websites is one way we looked at finding legislation last time. Now we're going to look at finding legislation using databases. So the first of these databases is LawLex for Australian legislation research. And this is what you get when you do a search. You can do an advanced search as well, but I'm just going to show you very quickly how to use just a simple search. So first we're going to do a search for the Commonwealth Games. We're going to do a search of all jurisdictions, and then we're going to select Go. What we have here is legislation that has the term Commonwealth Games in the title, and there's a bit of information about each of these pieces of legislation. So for example, we're looking here to the left at PA, which indicates that it's a principal act. We then have the title of the act, so the Melbourne 2006 Commonwealth Games. And then we note here to the right that it has been repealed. There are other principal acts, such as the Commonwealth Games Arrangements Act for 2011 from Queensland that has not been repealed. And then going further down, we have amending acts to earlier acts. And we have regulations and amending regulations. So we're interested in the current Commonwealth Games, so we're going to go straight to the Queensland legislation. And here LawLex gives us a little bit of information. So it shows us the source, being the Office of Queensland Parliamentary Council, which is the official source of legislation for Queensland. You can click on here to view the legislation. It also gives you a currency statement as to how up to date that piece of legislation is, and gives you other information about it. If you aren't finding what you're looking for in one of the databases, you can go to another database. So we'll show you now how to use Law 1. Look up legislation by your key term. Now again, we're going to look at all jurisdictions. We can restrict our title to just looking at, search to just looking at titles, or we can go within the legislation to headings and section headings. Now here we've got quite a significant number of results. That's because it's given us not only pieces of legislation, but it's giving us bills and regulations as well. So we're interested in the current Queensland Commonwealth Games. We only want a principal act, so we're going to go straight to that, and we're only interested in current acts. Now we've refined our results down to 8, and again we find the Commonwealth Games Arrangement Act, which is a key act in relation to the Commonwealth Games at the moment. So the next question is, how do we find parliamentary materials? So legislation research also includes finding materials that do not form part of the Act, but may assist in the interpretation of that Act. These are referred to as extrinsic materials or legislative materials or parliamentary materials. Such materials encompasses such things as explanatory memoranda, reports of law reform commissions or parliamentary committees, clause notes and fact sheets. Two key items that you'll often need to locate when you're doing your legislation research will be the explanatory memorandum that accompanies the bill and the second reading speech. So an explanatory memorandum, also referred to explanatory notes, is a document that is issued by a minister when explaining the purpose and the content of a bill, clause by clause and in plain language. Subsequently, it may be useful for statutory interpretation if the meaning of a provision of an Act is ambiguous or obscure. Tasmania does not have explanatory memoranda. However, you can go into the Tasmanian Hansard, clause notes, fact sheets, and votes and proceedings sections. Commonwealth explanatory memoranda can be accessed via the Parliament of Australia website or the Federal Register of Legislation. It can also be accessed via OSLI and Law 1, which we looked at earlier. Hansard is another key resource that you're going to need to know how to find. So Hansard is the name given to transcripts of parliamentary proceedings. Hansard may also be referred to as parliamentary debates. Generally speaking, online Hansard can be found on parliamentary websites. And as mentioned, the most important and interesting stage of a bill, on the progress of a bill, is the second reading speech. So the second reading speech is where the minister responsible for introducing the bill explains its purpose, the general principles of the bill, and that second reading speech is found within Hansard. So I'm just going to show you how to find Hansard, explanatory memoranda, and a second reading speech within the Federal Parliament. So again, from the library homepage, we will go to our subject guides. We'll then go to law, legal skills research, and then we're going to the section, how do I find legislation? So we have a part of that tab, where do I find parliamentary materials? So if we're looking in Tasmania, we'll go to the Parliament of Tasmania. For Commonwealth materials, we're going to go to the Australian Parliament. So when you're looking up material about an Act, you'll first need to go to the bill. So you'll want to go straight to the bills. And here you can use a keyword search. So we're interested in sports, just to follow the theme of the day, and search. And here we have one bill that refers to sports, so just using that as an example of finding the extrinsic material relating to that bill. So we have a summary of the bill, we have a progress report of the bill, where did it get up to? We also have on the right hand side links to the explanatory memorandum, and then we also have links to second reading speeches. And so that's generally speaking how you would find a second reading speech and explanatory memorandum within the Commonwealth jurisdiction. The databases that we discussed previously also do give quite good links to extrinsic materials. So if you are using, for example, we're looking at Law 1, if we want to go back to our Commonwealth Games Arrangements Act, here we have the text of the Act itself, but on the right hand side we have a little bit of key information about our Act. So it identifies which bill where the Act originated. You can download an as-made version or a consolidated version of the Act. You can also download a copy of the bill, the explanatory notes, which is the Queensland version of explanatory memorandum, and an explanatory speech. Similarly, if you go to Lawlex, so if you recall, we found the same bill, Commonwealth Games Arrangement Act of 2011, and it gives us links to explanatory notes and the second reading speech. So there's a variety of ways that we can get to that information because it is key information about an act. So most of these databases will also have it. So thank you for listening to the second podcast, and we've just had a look today about how to find legislation by topic. We've also had a look at finding key bits of parliamentary materials or extrinsic materials, specifically Hansard materials, the second reading speech and the explanatory memorandum. The next podcast is on assessing whether you have found an authoritative version of an act and how to cite that act when you're doing your assignments. Do listen for that one, and if you ever do need any help, please come into the Law Library. Our contact details are on the screen, and we're always happy to lend you a hand.